Welcome to the Stephen Hasner Show. We have an exciting guest today, Judy Blackwell, who's been an attorney here at Hasner Law for almost 11 years now, which is fantastic. Judy's an awesome lawyer, and she handles some really big cases at the firm. But first, we're going to talk, Judy, about your background, learn a little about yourself and how you got into law and your passion for law and ended up at Hasner Law.
Well, I have been practicing law now almost 40 years. Next June will be 40 years. And most of that time I've been doing work in workers' compensation, which is what I do here for Hasner Law. And like most lawyers, I don't think lawyers come to the law thinking I'm going to do workers' compensation or necessarily even personal injury or other things, but it's sort of like the job that you get and you fall into that, and as you learn more about it, that becomes your specialty, and that's what's happened with me with workers' compensation.
Yeah. And talk a little about your transition. I know you started doing defense work like I did the same, representing employers and
Right?
insurers, and then the passion to move to represent individuals and their families.
Yeah, I did. I represented employers and insurers for a long time. I took a little break in there, and I was an administrative law judge at the State Board of Workers' Compensation. Left that job and went out, and I was a partner at, a law firm in downtown Atlanta, and then with another firm in Marietta, and representing employers and insurers. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, but you know, I just got burned out on it. I got burned out on these folks that didn't want to help anybody, didn't want to do anything, just were really
Deny, delay.
deny and delay, difficult to deal with, and I mean, then they didn't appreciate anything that their attorneys did to help them for the most part. So I decided to transition into um, injured workers and came here because, in part of knowing about your reputation in helping injured workers and the good job that you did for them, to come here and be able to do that as well.
Yeah. And Judy's super modest. She doesn't like to sell the fact that she was a judge for 6 years to our clients. And I always say that we have our own Judge Judy, which we're grateful we have. But how many? Talk a little about that because it was 6 years, right?
6 years.
And
Right.
could you even guesstimate how many cases where you were the trial judge? I mean,
Well, you know, it, probably
hundreds?
around 500.
Wow. Wow. Where
Yeah.
you're making the decision, where like what we're dealing with in
Right.
litigation, where parties are having a
Yes.
dispute that leads to a trial that you're making a decision on.
Yeah.
I say that just because it shows her expertise. Judy is a walking encyclopedia when it comes to the law. Very impressive. And she's a true lawyer's lawyer. And one of the hardest, either the hardest or one of, I probably should just say the hardest working lawyer that I know. So we're very grateful, your passion, dedication, and love for what you do every day. Because you've been doing it 40 years, but you outwork the 5 to 10 year lawyers all day.
Well, I don't know about that, but you can't do this job without working hard. I mean, it takes a lot to be able to help people who are injured on the job.
Yeah, and just we'll talk a little bit more just about you've been here 11 years. What do you enjoy about representing individuals and families? I think it's easy to say what we don't like about representing institutional clients,
Right,
and those who are denying people benefits. But
right.
what do you enjoy? What like gets you up every day? Where's the passion for what you do?
Well, so many of these people are in really tough situations and they just don't know what to do. And usually by the time they come, now some of them come to us early on, but many of them come to us after trying to deal with an insurance company who is denying and delaying it, or maybe just not answering them at all, or maybe their employer doesn't answer them at all. And to be able to help them sort of navigate through the system is, it's rewarding. And we have some clients that are in tough times, and they're tough to deal with, but so many of them are very grateful for what we do for them, and that's the thing, is to be able to help them and to feel like that you've been able to get them through this system and get out at the end with a good result.
Yeah, it's I would say it's one sometimes the top three most difficult times that our clients face in their lives, and an opportunity to come alongside of them and take them from a stressful situation And I think it comes from like they don't know what to do. They don't know
Right.
what their rights are. And then
Yeah.
they're trusting us to help them and to be able to come alongside them and their
Right.
families and get a great result for their case. And sometimes in workers' comp, right, it's they're getting medical treatment, but then we were able to get them checks and the joy of, I
Right.
mean,
Or
you know,
maybe we're able to get them, they're seeing a doctor who's not helping them in any way, and we're able to help them get to someone who can help them get better so that they can get back to work
which
or,
is the whole goal.
right,
And the whole goal, and then at the end, obviously, get a great
get a
settlement when
settlement.
it's
Yeah.
time to settle the case. So, with Judy's vast experience in workers' comp, she handles a lot of large cases for the firm and a lot of catastrophic workers' comp cases. And Judy has had some awesome results the last few years, several multi-million-dollar cases that we're grateful that she handled. And we want to talk a little today about those cases, how we get those cases, and then how those cases are handled. Some people think you just get a case and you get a big settlement, but it takes a lot of energy, effort, and work to make sure the injured worker is protected through the process, receiving what they're supposed to receive, and then helping to maximize that.
Right.
So, talk about a little bit just for learning purposes of how how we get these cases, and then how you handle those and
Sure.
attack them.
Well, I mean, we get the cases in a variety of different ways. I mean, it may be a family member that calls us and says, that their family member's been injured and catastrophically and that they need help. Sometimes it's another lawyer that refers the case to us. So it could be a prior client that we did a good job for that refers a big case to us. So we get them in a variety of different ways. Um, Once we get the case, with catastrophic cases, you are not going to just get the case and get the case settled because there's too much going on with your injured worker. I mean, we're talking about, in catastrophic cases, we're talking about spinal cord injuries, we're talking about amputations, we're talking about brain injuries, things like that are really significant. And particularly with like our brain injured patients and our spinal cord injured patients, they're going to be needing things, extensive medical. They're going to have extensive medical needs. Like we had a case with a quadriplegic client, and he needed attendant care because he can't do things for himself anymore like he could do before. I mean, he needs help with feeding and bathing and being able to get to medical appointments. Simple things as turning over in bed at night, getting his medications, things like that. And so you've got to make sure that all of that is being provided to him. And some of these cases, housing is a necessity, because the person needs, maybe they're in a position where they didn't have a home at all, I mean, that they owned, at the time of the accident. They were renting, you know. I had one gentleman who we still represent, but who had lived, with a friend and basically was on his sofa, on the weekends because he would travel for work during the week, and we had to get an apartment for him. So that, and the employer and insurer have to help pay the rent so that he could have something that was appropriate for him as a brain injured patient. Then with the biggest case that we've settled was a spinal cord injured patient, and with him, the employer and insurer were providing him an apartment with attendant care, but all he wanted to do was go home. And that was our biggest, and he lived in a rural area. That was our biggest thing on that case, was to get him home. Um, we went through multiple uh, conferences with the state board or the rehab unit trying to get an agreement to do that. Um, we ended up having to request a hearing, and while the hearing was requested, we were able to get the case settled. And, the settlement included money for medical treatment, money for his attendant care, and money for his housing. And we were able to help him get all of that done as part of the settlement.
And on rehab conferences, explain a little bit for someone maybe who hasn't handled a CAT case. what's the difference between catastrophic and not catastrophic? I mean, you talk about, I guess, the types of injuries that would be catastrophic, but then how does rehab involve? What does that look like at the board and those kind of meetings?
Right. So when a case is declared catastrophic, it meets the criteria to be catastrophic because of the kind of injury that the person has. Again, brain injuries, spinal cord injuries, um, amputations, really significant burn injuries where they have second and third degree burns over, 30% of the
Large, yeah.
body. Those kind of things are considered catastrophic by the state board in the statute, in the workers' compensation statute. So when that happens, the employer insurer are to place a rehabilitation supplier, a vocational rehabilitation supplier on the case. And that person's job is to help the injured worker with their needs for medical and rehabilitation. And that includes things like housing, that includes attendant care if they need it, that includes making sure they get all the medical treatment that they need for their injuries. And so that person sort of is the gatekeeper that helps us make sure that that person gets everything that they need. If issues come up that either the rehabilitation supplier thinks that one party or the other is not doing what they need to do, or one of the parties is dissatisfied with how the rehabilitation process is going forward, we can get the State Board of Workers' Compensation Rehabilitation Division involved by requesting a rehabilitation conference. And then all the parties, the rehab supplier, and the rehabilitation coordinator at the state board sit down for a conference to try to work out those issues, which, sometimes that's very good. We can get things done, we can get agreements that move the case forward. And sometimes, like in the case that I was talking about,
you
they're
don't.
just frustrating where the insurance company agrees to do things like, find out how much it will cost for various types of housing and then end up saying we're just
No,
not going to do
pay
it.
for
We're
it,
just
yeah.
not going to pay for anything.
So, but you're still allowed to go ahead and file a request for hearing to go in
Right.
front
Then
of the
you
trial.
then you do the hearing.
trial
Right.
court. Yeah.
Yes.
Um, and I know in that case in particular, in generally cat cases, you're going to have a lot of those conferences.
Yes, I've had conferences in other catastrophic cases, to get things done. Right.
Yeah, and you have situations just like in any case where adjusters or insurers are just denying certain benefits,
Right.
and you just got to deal with that
Correct.
accordingly. And I know it's awesome in that case. We can talk a little bit later about the result, especially with the housing, and that now he has a house in his rural town, and he's living. He's very happy, which we're grateful to be a part of that. And Judy, I know you have a ton of experience, but take yourself back to when you've handled your first, big catastrophic case. How did you learn how to handle it, and then what steps did you take in handling and leading the case?
Well, I did a lot of catastrophic work when I was representing employers and insurers as well. And so, it is a learn by doing. I mean, one of the things that you do, of course, is, you learn from looking at the statute about what's required, for an employer insurer to provide, in a catastrophic case. So you learn that they're required to handle the medical part of the case, that there may be housing modifications that have to be done or housing that has to be provided. There may be attendant care that they're going to be required to provide. So, you're learning by looking at the statute that tells you what kind of thing, and the board rules that require you show what kind of things an employer insurer are required to provide. If you're representing the employer and insurer, or it's the same thing if you're representing the injured worker. What kind of things can you get for your injured client? And
What benefits you
what
have
benefits
rights to?
you have rights to, right? And so, that's your starting point. A lot of it I've learned through dealing too with the rehabilitation suppliers on the case. I mean, the good ones are a great resource for lawyers that are handling catastrophic claims.
From the medical side, especially because
medical
they
side.
have
Correct.
so much experience on what's generally recommended for this type of injury, whether
Right.
it's spinal cord or
Right.
amputation,
And
or
they're
what the next steps are.
correct. And they'll coordinate with those doctors for you to help you get those benefits for your client. You know, they're out there, as a general rule, we don't like nurses to be talking to the doctors because in a lot of these cases, these medical case managers are trying to prevent our clients from getting benefits. But it's different with a vocational rehabilitation specialist. Most of them are nurses. And so what they're doing is they're trying to they're meeting with the doctor. They're finding out, okay, if this is a spinal cord injury, what does this guy need? He needs a certain kind of wheelchair.
Correct.
Okay. And then does he need certain kind of bracing? Does he need, certain sort of other equipment? Does he need a standing frame? Does he need, does he need a shower chair? They're working with the doctor and the lawyer to look at and figure out what it is that this person needs. And over time, you start to learn those. When you do these cases, you start to look at those records and you start to say, okay, I know my client needs this. I know my client needs this. I know my client, they need a shower chair as well as a power wheelchair. They're going to need arm braces. They may need, they're going to need all sorts of supplies for their different programs that they need to take care of themselves, or to be taken care of, because a lot of them really have, significant needs to be taken care of. If it's an amputation case, what do they need? What kind of prosthetics are going to be available to them? How many do they need? Do they need a body-powered one and a myoelectric one? Do they need
an aesthetic one? I have a case now where I've got a client an aesthetic prosthetic that he wasn't receiving. It's not something functional. The functional one's going to help him get back to work, but aesthetic one is important. So you want to make sure you get this done before you go to resolve the case.
Right. What kind of supplies do they need to go along with their prosthetics? What kind of attachments do they need for those prosthetics? Yeah. So, you start to learn.
You don't learn that on the first one, right?
You don't learn it on the first one. Well, you do learn it on the first one, but you learn it, sort of through trial and error. But then the next one, there's more that needs to be done. There's more that needs to be done, and there's more things that they may be entitled to, and it's more complex maybe than it first appears.
And it's probably, when looking back at myself, my first one, I was asking a lot of questions. So I remember I actually took the time. A good advice is, as you get more experience, you know what's going on in the process. But I remember going to some of these meetings with the doctors related to the rehab, when the nurse was there, and hearing the questions being asked, and then even talking to the nurse after, why do you think that's important? And there's a varying of those nurses of how helpful they are to us on our side.
Right. If you have a good one, they're a fantastic resource. And, on most of the cases, catastrophic cases that I've handled, that nurse case, that rehabilitation nurse, I'm talking to them regularly. I'm talking to them almost as much as I'm talking to the client about what's going on, because they are there and they can really be your client's advocate with the insurance company, with the doctors, and with the board if they do a good job. And most of them, I find on these really significant, serious cases, they're really, for the most part, very helpful.
Yeah.
And you can get a bad one, that it can happen. But I've been very lucky to have really helpful ones for the most part.
And then the good ones who you want.
I know the good ones, and I always ask for them the next time. That's right. Yeah. If someone's not good, I don't. If I have somebody that does a great job, I put that down and put them in my files, and remember that that's who I want to ask for if we come into that situation again.
Yeah. And the statute allows for lifetime checks in catastrophic cases, so we know we're good there. We just want to make sure the client's receiving the correct amount and we get the records. But we do that in every case, whether it's a minor case or a non-cat or cat case. So it's really about the extensive medical needs and making sure that they're protected. And if we move towards the spinal cord case, which I know you mentioned was the largest settlement, and we talked about the housing and the modifications. This case, I know he received a new house. Which was an awesome result for him for that benefit. But talk about some of the things we do that could be helpful to someone to making sure, because really, I mean, I say this all the time about catastrophic cases, because everyone says, oh, you're a plaintiff's firm, you want to have big cases. Yes, but sometimes there's workers' comp cases that are so big when it comes to the medical needs that it's almost not in the best interest of the client to even settle the case, because we're not looking to just settle the case, get money for the client, get money for the firm, and then the client's not protected medically, because the
Right.
needs are so great. If this is a situation, they've got 20 years left in life, 30 years left in life. If somewhere comes, 5 years go by and they don't have the medical needs, it just
Right.
doesn't make sense to settle the
Right.
case.
It doesn't. I mean, in order to settle these big catastrophic cases, it is not just a situation where you go, okay, we have a Medicare set aside and we got some money for the client. Because that client has so many needs. So, what are they and how do you do things to make it work so that you can see if it can be settled? Um, you know, First you've got to get the Medicare set aside. Um, in some of these cases, the person may be eligible for some Medicaid benefits that help pay for attendant care. So then you have to get someone involved to do a special needs trust to do that. If you're looking at how are you going to make this money that the client gets stretch as far as possible, you may have to look at, is there a family member that's going to be staying with them at night so that they don't have to expend some of their settlement money for more attendant care. I mean, so that may be an important, decision. I have a case now that is very difficult to settle because the client doesn't have a lot of family and doesn't have someone that could stay with him at night. So, but he has a brain injury and really needs an attendant with him all the time. So it makes it very difficult to get the insurance company to pay enough money so that there will always be an attendant there, because it's not like he's got a family member that's staying with him, part of the time. So you're looking at, how do I take and put everything together into a package that works? What about Social Security? What about if we run out of money in the MSA? Does this person have Medicare? Are they going to be able then to get in and have Medicare take over and pay for their medical expenses? Who's going to manage the money for them? Because a lot of these folks, are not real savvy with a lot of money. They paid their bills.
I'd want help with
They
managing
need
that
they need help,
millions
right?
of dollars.
So you're gonna have to get somebody involved to help them with the Medicare trust and to help them with the money that they're getting, you know, for paying their bills and paying for other things that they desire in life. So it's a process of having to put a lot of things together. Then in a case that we settled, there was money in the case for this person to go out and get a home. It was not provided by the insurance company. So as part of a settlement, we helped them get the home. Well, I don't know how to build a handicapped home. I mean, we had an OT that looked at everything and said this is what they need as far as needs. And then we got a housing expert involved. So there was another person that, you can rely on to help you do things for your client. And the housing expert was able to help us get get a modular home built for this client that met his needs. And so there's a lot to these things. It's not like I said, it's not just like get the MSA, get the case settled. There's a lot more to it, and you have to, combine resources and experts to help you get it done.
Yeah, and you build such close relationships with these clients that they're almost your family member. And how would you treat your own family member to make sure that 5, 10, 20, 25 years down the line, because I know everyone's estimating life expectancy when you're dealing with exposure for values of cases, but to make sure no matter what, he's going to have the attendant care he needs. No matter
Right.
what, he's going to have the supplies. He's going to have help with bladder and bowel, program and everything that he needs,
Right.
to make sure that he's protected. And there's streams of money, right? We use third parties to come in and help us at the client's choice of who they want to use for
Right.
managing the money, having annuities, having, streams of income to make sure there's consistent income,
Right.
that there's not this lump sum that can just be spent and be gone,
Right.
or relying on the markets ups and downs for
Right.
future income streams in addition to into medical needs. So it's a lot of energy and effort and work to make sure, and that's not even talking about making sure we're getting fair value, because if we're not getting the right value, you can't have the right,
Right.
protections to even settle the case. But that applies to catastrophic and non-catastrophic cases. If it's
It
not
does.
enough, where the firm is going to tell the client it's not enough, and
Yeah.
they shouldn't resolve the case if
Yeah.
it's not in their best interest. But I appreciate you for how much you care about the clients, and you really you're going to make sure that every stone is
Well, we
turned.
try. Yeah,
That there's no stone unturned, I guess is the right saying, but that you're going to do everything and anything you can to make sure that the person's and the family's protected, right?
Right.
Because this affects family. It's not just the individual.
Right. That there is going to be not just enough money, but enough resources that this person will be taken care of. Whether it's, the MSA for medical or the special needs trust that allows them to get additional care through Medicaid
Yeah.
that helps them be able to settle that case and know that they're going to have what they need.
Yeah. Well, there's safety nets here, right? With
Right.
Medicare, with Medicaid, and making sure. But if you don't handle the money correctly and how it's resolved and who receives it and what accounts, you can lose your rights to other benefits. So
Right.
so part of learning, if you're a lawyer wanting to start take on these catastrophic cases, but it really applies to just handling cases. You
It
need to
does.
be real savvy with Social Security, disability, and obviously there's lawyers that specialize in that
Right.
you can
And
use as a
right.
resource to
Yes.
call. We refer to some really good lawyers that specialize in that
We
area,
do.
but we have clarity of those issues and how they relate to our cases and affect our clients. Weekly checks them out, but then that then leads to having to do a Medicare set aside, all the rules surrounding MSAs, which can be challenging to learn and follow up on all the memos that come out.
Right.
But being on top of that is very important. And then, there's lawyers out there in firms that will help you with special needs trusts and asking those questions and learning. And like Judy was saying earlier, once you handle it, you know it, and then you take really good notes and you manage it. And when it comes up again, you go back to your notes. And there's also treatises in workers' comp that is really
sure.
helpful when it comes to learning about catastrophic cases. We didn't even talk about the catch-all provision in catastrophic cases, which aren't what you would think of when it comes to spinal cord injuries or burns or amputations
Right.
or brain injuries, where you have a mechanism under the statute to prove if there's no job available that the client can do based on their restrictions
Right.
within substantial numbers of the national economy, but
Yeah.
that requires voc
Sure.
experts and definite litigation and fighting over, where you can actually prove and go to court that someone's catastrophic, even though it's not one of the injuries that we would think of
Right.
necessarily as catastrophic, because it's more about their economic disability and ability to work.
Right.
So Judy, you've given a lot of tips, but if you give one tip to end our conversation to new lawyers that maybe are interested in workers' comp, what tip would you give as such an experienced lawyer and judge?
Well, what I would tell everybody when you're trying to handle cases is that workers' compensation is a statutory system. So if you're going to handle workers' compensation cases, you need to get out 34.9 of the Georgia Code and read it and go back to it again and again. Every time you have an issue in a case, go back to that statute, go back to those board rules, because they really will tell you a lot of what you need to do in handling a case. And so many lawyers fail to do that. They just think, well, I sort of know what to do in this system. And then they miss things because they're not as familiar with that code as they need to be.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation. I had a lawyer one time tell me you should read the code every year. Read the code and the board rules every year to make sure you're not missing something and you're aware of it. I mean, that's really good advice. But we wanted to thank you for coming to the Stephen Hasner Show. And Judy, thank you for being a part of it. We're going to have you back again. You're too good. You're too good to have too much experience not to impart more wisdom in the future. So we're grateful. So thank you for coming. And remember to like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.